Millbrook, Indiana, July 16th. The mercury had been climbing steadily since dawn, transforming the small industrial town of Millbrook into a shimmering mirage of heat waves and desperate searches for shade. At 94 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity thick enough to swim through, it was the kind of oppressive Saturday afternoon that sent every family within a 50-mile radius scrambling toward the promise of chlorinated relief. The Millbrook Municipal Pool complex stretched across 4 acres of cracked asphalt and sun-bleached concrete, a monument to 1970s civic optimism that had seen better decades. Chain-link fencing surrounded the facility, its green coating peeling like sunburned skin, while the main pool's azure waters sparkled deceptively in the brutal afternoon sun. The smaller kiddie pool sat adjacent, barely 3 feet deep, its cartoon-painted bottom visible through water that maintenance worker Diego Vasquez had shocked with extra chlorine that very morning. By 2:47 p.m., the facility was operating at near capacity. 327 visitors had passed through the turnstiles since opening at noon, each paying the modest $3 admission fee to escape the relentless heat. The air thrummed with the cacophony of summer, children shrieking with delight as they cannonballed into the deep end. The sharp whistle blasts from lifeguards, the tinny distortion of a radio playing Kelly Clarkson's "Since You've Been Gone" for the dozenth time that day. 17-year-old lifeguard Bethany Rodriguez sat elevated in her white wooden chair, aviator sunglasses reflecting the chaos below. While she methodically scanned the water, she had been working the job for 2 summers now, and the routine had become second nature. 20 seconds scanning the deep end, 10 seconds checking the diving board area, sweep left to right across the main pool, quick glance at the kiddie section, repeat. Her whistle hung from a red lanyard around her neck, warmed by the heat until it was almost too hot to touch. It was Bethany who first noticed them. The group of 5 children had arrived sometime around 2:15 p.m., though later investigators would struggle to pinpoint the exact moment they had appeared. They hadn't come together, that much the security footage would eventually confirm, but had somehow gravitated toward each other with the magnetic inevitability of children recognizing kindred spirits. There was Tanner Hartwell, 8 years old, with a mop of wheat blonde hair that his mother had tried unsuccessfully to tame with gel that morning. He wore swim trunks decorated with cartoon sharks, a choice that would haunt investigators for years to come. Tanner had been the last to arrive, pedaling his red Schwinn bicycle through the facility's front gate with the casual confidence of a child who had made this journey 100 times before. Delilah Patterson, 7, had been at the pool since opening, her grandmother Dorothy having dropped her off with stern instructions to stay where the lifeguards can see you. Delilah's dark braids were secured with bright yellow hair ties that bobbed as she moved, and she wore a one-piece swimsuit covered in dancing dolphins. She had been quietly practicing her handstands in the shallow end when the others began to gather. The twins, Ricky and Ronnie Castellanos, had arrived with their teenage sister Maria, who had immediately claimed a lounge chair and buried her nose in a well-worn copy of the Da Vinci Code. 9 years old, and identical down to the matching Superman swim trunks their father had bought them for their birthday. The month before, the boys were practically inseparable. Even their movements seemed synchronized as they treaded water, 2 pieces of the same restless energy. And then there was Paige Hendricks, 6 years old, the youngest of the group and the one who would later be described by witnesses as the unofficial leader. Despite her age, something about Paige commanded attention. Maybe it was her fearless approach to the diving board, or the way she organized impromptu games of Marco Polo with children she had never met before. She wore a pink 2-piece suit with ruffles along the edges, and her auburn hair caught the sunlight like copper wire whenever she emerged from underwater. Bethany Rodriguez would later tell investigators that she had been watching the group with growing unease, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. There was something about the way they moved together. She'd say, something purposeful that didn't quite fit the random nature of childhood friendships. They hadn't been playing the usual pool games, No tag, no races, no attempts to see who could hold their breath the longest. Instead, they seemed to be waiting. At 2:52 p.m., according to the pool's analog clock that hung above the snack bar, Bethany noticed the 5 children gathering at the eastern edge of the main pool. They stood in a loose circle, water lapping at their waists, their heads bent together in what appeared to be intense conversation. She couldn't hear what they were saying over the ambient noise, but their body language suggested urgency, purpose. That's when she saw him. A man in his 30s wearing a faded Cubs baseball cap and mirrored sunglasses, standing just outside the pool fence near the equipment shed. He wasn't particularly tall or imposing. Later witnesses would describe him as forgettable in that way that makes police sketches nearly impossible. But something about his stillness, the way he seemed focused entirely on the group of 5 children, made Bethany's stomach tighten with instinctual dread. She was reaching for her whistle, preparing to call the children back toward the center of the pool where she could keep better track of them, when the man simply, one moment he was there, the next he had vanished around the corner of the equipment shed like smoke dissipating in the humid air. The relief Bethany felt was immediate, but short-lived. When she turned her attention back to the pool, scanning for the familiar sight of 5 small heads bobbing in the water, she found nothing but empty space where they had been standing moments before. The first wave of panic hit her like ice water. She stood up in her chair, sunglasses sliding down her nose as she frantically scanned the entire pool area. Deep end, shallow end, diving board, kiddie pool, nothing. The 5 children had simply vanished. "Hey," she called out, her voice cracking slightly. "Did anyone see where those kids went? The 5 that were right here?" The nearest swimmer, a middle-aged man doing lazy laps, paused and looked around with the confused expression of someone being asked to solve a puzzle they hadn't realized existed. "What kids?" Bethany's whistle shrieked across the pool complex as she blew 3 sharp blasts, the signal for immediate attention. The sound cut through the afternoon chaos like a knife, causing conversations to halt and heads to turn toward her chair. "I need everyone to look around," she called out, her training kicking in even as her heart hammered against her ribs. 5 children, 3 boys, 2 girls between 6 and 9 years old. "Has anyone seen them leave the pool area?" The response was a scattered chorus of headshakes and confused murmurs. The other lifeguard, Kevin Morrow, was already jogging toward her from his position near the diving board. "What's going on?" Kevin asked, shading his eyes as he looked up at her. 5 kids were right here 30 seconds ago, Bethany said, pointing to the spot where she had last seen them. "They were talking in a group, and now they're just gone." Kevin's expression shifted from concern to something approaching alarm. In the 2 years he had been working at the pool, children wandered off regularly, usually to the bathroom or the snack bar, but they didn't simply vanish from the middle of the pool without anyone noticing. "Did you check the changing rooms?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. The changing rooms were on the opposite side of the facility, and the children would have had to pass directly in front of multiple witnesses to reach them. "I will check anyway," Kevin said, already moving toward the facility building. "Keep scanning the water." As Kevin jogged away, Bethany found herself staring at the spot where the 5 children had been standing. The water was completely undisturbed, as if they had never been there at all. But she knew what she had seen. She had been watching them for nearly 40 minutes, had seen them talking and moving together with that strange sense of purpose. The man in the Cubs hat, where had he gone? She turned toward the equipment shed, but from her elevated position, she could see that the area was empty. A service road ran behind the facility, leading to a small parking area where maintenance vehicles were stored. But it was separated from the pool by a 8-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. No way for children to climb over, and the gates were kept locked during operational hours. 5 minutes stretched into 10, then 15. Kevin returned from the changing rooms empty-handed, his face grim. They had expanded the search to include the snack bar, The entrance turnstiles, even the parking lot beyond the facility. Nothing. Pool manager Janet Kowalski arrived at 3:15 p.m., summoned by Kevin's increasingly frantic radio calls. A heavy-set woman in her 50s who had been running the facility for 12 years. Janet had seen everything from minor scrapes to serious diving accidents, but she had never had children simply disappear. "You're absolutely certain they didn't leave through the main entrance?" she asked Bethany for the third time. "I never took my eyes off them," Bethany insisted. "They were right there, talking in a group, and then they were gone. It happened in maybe 15 seconds. Janet's radio crackled to life. It was Tommy Flores, the teenager working the front gate. "Ma'am, I have been checking our entrance log. No families have left since 2:30 and definitely no unaccompanied children." The first police cruiser arrived at 3:42 p.m., followed by two more within minutes. Officer Patricia Wells, a 15-year veteran of the Millbrook Police Department, took charge of the scene with the calm efficiency of someone who had responded to hundreds of missing child calls. Most of them, she knew, ended with kids found hiding in bathroom stalls or sneaking candy from the snack bar. But as she walked the perimeter of the facility and interviewed the growing list of witnesses, a cold certainty began to settle in her chest. These children were truly gone. At 4:15 p.m., as the pool was being evacuated and a more extensive search organized, Officer Wells received a radio call that would haunt her for the rest of her career. "Patricia, we have got the families here," came the voice of dispatcher Lynn Martinez. "All 5 sets of parents. They're asking if we have found their children yet." Wells felt her mouth go dry. "All 5 families called in missing children?" "That's affirmative." Calls started coming in around 3:30. Tanner Hartwell was supposed to be home by 3:15. The Patterson girl's grandmother expected her back by 3:30. The Castellanos twins were supposed to meet their sister Maria in the parking lot at 3:45, but when she went looking for them, the radio fell silent for a moment before Lynn's voice returned. Smaller somehow. "Patricia, these families don't know each other. The kids didn't arrive together, but they all vanished at exactly the same time." As Officer Wells stood in the now empty pool area, watching crime scene technicians begin their methodical documentation, she found herself staring at the water where 5 children had been playing less than 2 hours earlier. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the concrete deck. In a few hours, this would be just another closed municipal pool, quiet and abandoned until the next day's chaos began. But something had happened here, something that defied explanation. The security camera mounted on the facility's main building had been malfunctioning for 3 weeks, its lens obscured by what maintenance records would later show was deliberately applied black paint. The backup camera near the entrance had captured the children arriving, but its angle couldn't see the pool area where they had disappeared, and in the equipment shed, where the man in the Cubs hat had been standing. Investigators would find something that would keep them awake for months to come. 5 small piles of clothing, neatly folded and stacked. Swimsuits still damp with chlorinated water. 5 pairs of flip-flops arranged in a perfect line. But no children. It was as if they had simply walked out of their clothes and vanished into the humid Indiana air. The call came into the FBI field office in Indianapolis at 11:47 p.m. that same night. Special Agent Rebecca Thorne had been heading home after a 16-hour day when her phone buzzed with a text message that would define the next 2 decades of her career. 5 children missing, Millbrook Pool, unexplained circumstances. Need immediate response. She had handled missing children cases before, too many of them, and knew that the first 48 hours were critical. But as she read the preliminary report while speeding through the empty Indiana countryside, she felt a familiar ice-cold sensation in her stomach. This wasn't a typical abduction or runaway situation. This was something else entirely. As Agent Thorne pulled into the parking lot of the Millbrook Municipal Pool at 12:30 a.m., She noticed that the facility was still blazing with floodlights, casting harsh shadows across the empty concrete. Police cars lined the entrance, their red and blue lights painting the surrounding trees in apocalyptic colors. She grabbed her forensics kit from the trunk and paused for a moment to study the scene. Somewhere in this ordinary place, 5 children had vanished without a trace, and despite 2 decades of experience telling her that missing children were usually found within 72 hours, she had the unsettling feeling that this case would be different. Very different. The pool water glittered under the artificial lights as still as glass, keeping its secrets. Agent Rebecca Thorne had investigated over 200 missing persons cases in her 14-year career with the FBI, but she had never seen a crime scene that felt so fundamentally wrong. As she ducked under the yellow tape and approached the equipment shed, every instinct she had developed told her that the laws of physics had somehow been suspended in this small Indiana town. The shed stood approximately 40 feet from the eastern edge of the pool, a utilitarian concrete block structure that housed pump equipment, chemical storage, and maintenance supplies. Under the harsh glare of the portable floodlights that had been hastily erected, it looked like something from a fever dream, ordinary and mundane, yet somehow threatening. Detective Ray Kozlowski of the Millbrook Police Department met her at the shed's entrance. He was a compact man in his 40s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent too many years witnessing humanity's darker impulses. But tonight his usual stoic demeanor had cracked, revealing something that looked dangerously close to fear. "I have been doing this job for 18 years, he said without preamble, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have seen murder scenes, suicides, accidents that would make grown men cry. But this," he gestured toward the shed's interior, "this makes no goddamn sense." Thorne pulled on latex gloves and stepped inside. The shed was cramped, barely 8 feet by 10 feet, filled with the industrial symphony of humming pool pumps and the sharp tang of chlorine chemicals. But in the far corner, arranged with almost ritualistic precision, were 5 complete sets of children's clothing. She knelt beside the nearest pile, a pair of shark-decorated swim trunks, a small white t-shirt, and tiny flip-flops with worn soles. The fabric was still damp, not just with water but with something else she couldn't immediately identify, a sweet, almost floral scent that seemed completely out of place in the chemical-heavy environment. "Have these been photographed?" she asked. "Every angle, twice," Kozlowski replied. "Crime scene team finished about an hour ago. We have been waiting for you before we bag anything." Thorne stood and surveyed the arrangement. 5 distinct piles, each containing the exact clothing that witnesses had described seeing on the missing children. But the positioning was what made her skin crawl. Each pile was precisely 3 feet from the others, forming a perfect pentagon around a small drain in the shed's concrete floor. "The drain," she said. "Where does it lead?" "That's the thing," Kozlowski said, consulting a wrinkled piece of paper. "According to city records, this drain connects to the main sewage system, but the maintenance crew says they have never seen it used. The pumps handle all the water filtration, and chemicals are stored in sealed containers." Thorne crouched next to the drain. It was maybe 6 inches in diameter, covered by a metal grate that showed no signs of recent disturbance. Certainly too small for a child to fit through, even the youngest. But as she leaned closer, she caught that same sweet scent, stronger now, rising from the darkness below. "Has anyone checked the sewage lines?" "City sent a crew down 2 hours ago," Kozlowski said. "Found nothing but normal flow. But," he hesitated, glancing around as if worried about being overheard. "The crew chief said something strange. The water coming from this section was cleaner than it should be, like it had been filtered multiple times." Outside the shed, Thorne could hear the organized chaos of a major investigation beginning to unfold. More FBI units were arriving from Indianapolis, and she could see the distinctive white vans of the evidence response team setting up their mobile command center in the pool's parking lot. But inside this small concrete box, Surrounded by the inexplicable arrangement of children's clothing, she felt isolated from the rational world of forensic science and logical explanations. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Assistant Director Frank Morrison. "Media getting wind of this. Need answers fast. What's the situation?" She typed back, "Unknown subjects, unknown methodology. Scene is unusual. Will brief." As she pocketed the phone, Kozlowski approached with a manila folder thick with witness statements. "We have interviewed 43 people who were at the pool today," he said. "Want to hear something interesting? Nobody remembers seeing these 5 kids arrive together, but 17 witnesses specifically mentioned seeing them talking in a group right before they vanished." Talking about what? That's where it gets weird. The few people who were close enough to hear said they weren't speaking English, or any language they could recognize. One witness described it as singing without music. Another said it sounded like water talking. Thorne felt a familiar chill run down her spine. In her experience, when multiple witnesses reported impossible things, it usually meant one of 2 scenarios: mass hysteria, or something genuinely unexplainable was happening. What about the man in the Cubs hat? 3 people saw him. All gave consistent descriptions: white male, 30s, average height and build, mirrored sunglasses. But here's the problem. Security footage from the entrance shows no one matching that description entering or leaving the facility. Camera malfunction? No, the entrance camera was working fine. It's the internal cameras that were sabotaged. Someone knew exactly which equipment to disable. They were interrupted by commotion from outside the shed. Through the open door, Thorne could see a crowd of people pressing against the police barriers that had been erected around the facility's entrance. Parents, she realized. The families of the missing children had arrived. "Detective Kozlowski," came a voice over the radio. "We need you out here. The families are demanding answers." As they walked toward the main pool area, Thorne found herself studying the facility with fresh eyes. The Millbrook Municipal Pool was a relic from a simpler time, when small-town America believed that public amenities could solve most social problems. But tonight, under the harsh glare of police lights, it looked like something from a nightmare. The pool water itself had been drained as a precautionary measure, revealing a cracked concrete bottom stained with decades of chemical treatments. But it was the silence that disturbed her most, the complete absence of the laughter and chaos that had filled this space just hours earlier. Near the facility's main building, she could see the 5 families huddled together despite never having met before today. The Hartwells stood apart slightly, Tanner's father Richard pacing in tight circles while his wife Angela clutched a small Superman action figure that Thorne assumed belonged to their missing son. The Patterson family was represented by Dorothy, the grandmother who had dropped off Delilah that afternoon. She sat hunched on a plastic chair, aged by grief and incomprehension. The Castellanos family was the largest group. Parents Miguel and Carmen, along with their teenage daughter Maria, who kept repeating that she should have been watching her brothers more carefully. And finally, the Hendricks family, Paige's parents Jennifer and David, who stood holding each other as if physical contact could somehow shield them from the unthinkable reality they were facing. Agent Thorne. She turned to find a young police officer approaching with a concerned expression. "Yes, we have got a problem. Channel 8 News just pulled up outside the barriers. They're asking about reports of multiple missing children." Thorne cursed under her breath. Media attention was the last thing they needed while the investigation was still in its crucial early stages. But she also knew that in missing children cases, sometimes publicity could generate vital leads. "Keep them back for now," she said. "I will give a brief statement in 30 minutes. As the officer nodded and walked away, Thorne's phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, the FBI's leading expert on unexplained disappearances. "Liz, please tell me you have some insight into this mess. I have been reading the preliminary reports." Dr. Hartman's voice was tight with concern. "Rebecca, this case matches patterns I have been tracking for 15 years. Patterns that nobody wants to officially acknowledge. What kind of patterns? Mass disappearances at aquatic facilities. Always children. Always in groups of 3 to 7. The clothes left behind. The lack of physical evidence. The witnesses reporting unusual behavior immediately before the vanishing. Thorne felt her stomach drop. How many cases are we talking about? Officially, 0. These incidents get classified as runaways, family abductions, or remain unsolved. But unofficially, I have documented 23 similar cases since 1987. Different states, different circumstances, but the core elements are always the same. And the children? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Dr. Hartman spoke again. None of them have ever been found. As Thorne ended the call, she realized that Detective Kozlowski had been listening to her side of the conversation. His face had gone pale. "Agent Thorne," he said quietly, "there's something else you need to see." He led her back toward the equipment shed, but this time continued past it to a section of the facility that had been cordoned off earlier. Here, the chain-link fence that surrounded the pool complex was interrupted by a service gate that provided access to the maintenance road behind the facility. The gate was found unlocked when we arrived, Kozlowski explained. Maintenance records show it should have been secured with a padlock, but the lock was missing. He pointed to the ground near the gate. In the soft dirt, illuminated by a portable spotlight, were footprints, but not the kind of footprints that belonged in a missing children investigation. The impressions were small, child-sized, but they didn't show the tread pattern of shoes or sandals. Instead, they appeared to be bare feet, but with an unusual characteristic. The prints showed only 4 toes. "Could be a medical condition," Kozlowski said, though his voice suggested he didn't believe his own explanation. "Some kids are born with fewer digits." Thorne knelt beside the prints, using a small flashlight to examine them more closely. The impressions were deep and clear, suggesting that whoever made them had been walking deliberately, not running, and they led in a straight line from the service gate toward a wooded area that bordered the facility's eastern boundary. "How many sets of prints?" 5, Kozlowski said. "All the same size, all showing the same 4-toe pattern." As Thorne stood up, her mind raced through possible explanations. Medical conditions, deliberate mutilation, prosthetic devices. None of them felt right. The prints were too uniform, too precise. Her radio crackled to life. "Agent Thorne, this is command. We have got something at the hospital you need to see." "What kind of something?" "A witness. Young girl brought in 2 hours ago, with what appeared to be severe dehydration and hypothermia. She's been unconscious until now, but she just woke up asking about 5 missing children. Says she knows where they went." Thorne exchanged glances with Kozlowski. "We're en route." As they walked back toward the main facility, Thorne found herself looking over her shoulder at the equipment shed. Something about the arrangement of those clothes continued to bother her. Beyond the obvious impossibility of the children's disappearance, there had been a precision to their placement that suggested ritual, ceremony, purpose. But purpose for what? The drive to Millbrook General Hospital took 12 minutes through empty streets that felt heavy with unspoken dread. The town had that peculiar quality of a place where terrible things happened. Windows glowed with the blue light of televisions tuned to emergency broadcasts, and the few people visible on sidewalks moved with the hurried pace of those trying to reach safety. At the hospital, they were directed to the pediatric wing, where a small crowd of medical personnel had gathered around room 3. Through the window, Thorne could see a girl who appeared to be around 9 years old, sitting upright in bed with the hollow-eyed expression of someone who had seen too much. Dr. Patricia Kendall, the attending physician, met them outside the room. "We found her in Riverside Park around 10:30 p.m., Dr. Kendall explained. "Severe dehydration, body temperature at 93 degrees, completely soaked, despite the fact that it hasn't rained in 3 days. No identification, no family has reported her missing." "What did she say about the missing children?" "She keeps asking if we have found the water friends yet. Says they went below together, and that someone needs to bring them back before the tide changes. Thorne felt that familiar chill again. Can we talk to her? Briefly. She's still very weak. They entered the room, and the girl's eyes immediately focused on Thorne, with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. Her hair was still damp and smelled of the same sweet, floral scent that had been present in the equipment shed. Are you here about Tanner and the others? The girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Thorne said, pulling a chair beside the bed. What's your name, sweetheart? Luna Marsh. I was supposed to go with them, but I got scared. Go where? The girl's eyes filled with tears. To see the waterman. He comes every summer when it gets really hot. He chooses children who can hear the water singing. Thorne felt her mouth go dry. What does the waterman look like? He wears a baseball hat and glasses so you can't see his eyes. But underneath, Luna shuddered. Underneath he's all wet and green and smells like the bottom of a pond. Detective Kozlowski leaned forward. Luna, where did the children go with this man? Down through the drain. There are tunnels under the pool. Tunnels that go all the way to the old quarry. But you can only get there when the water calls to you. And once you go down, she began crying harder. Once you go down, you can't come back unless someone brings you. Who told you this? Thorne asked gently. The waterman. He's been talking to me all summer, telling me about the children who went before. He said I was supposed to come today, but when I saw them disappear, I ran away. I hid in the park until I got too cold to stay awake. Dr. Kendall stepped forward. That's enough for now. She needs rest. As they left the room, Thorne's mind was reeling. A witness who claimed to have spoken with the suspect, references to previous disappearances, and the mention of an old quarry that she had noticed on local maps but hadn't considered relevant. But most disturbing of all was the girl's description of tunnels beneath the pool, because according to city engineering records, no such tunnels existed. Her phone buzzed with another message from Assistant Director Morrison. Amber Alert issued. Media Frenzy Building. Need progress report ASAP. Thorne looked at her watch. 2:47 a.m. In less than 13 hours, 5 children had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their clothes and a trail of 4-toed footprints leading toward a dark forest. She had a witness who claimed to have supernatural knowledge of the case, physical evidence that defied explanation, and a growing suspicion that this investigation was going to challenge everything she thought she knew about the possible and impossible. As she and Kozlowski walked back through the hospital's empty corridors, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against some kind of deadline. But a deadline for what? Outside, the Indiana sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn, painting the eastern horizon in shades of pale orange and pink. Somewhere in this quiet town, 5 families were spending the worst night of their lives, praying for news that Thorne increasingly feared she might never be able to deliver. And somewhere else, in tunnels that shouldn't exist according to a waterman who might or might not be human, 5 children were facing an unimaginable fate. The radio in Kozlowski's patrol car crackled as they reached the parking lot. All units, we have got reports of someone breaking into the Millbrook Pool facility. Responding units report the building is secure, but witnesses saw lights moving in the pool area. Thorne felt her pulse quicken. Someone's going back to the scene. As they sped through the empty streets back toward the pool, she found herself wondering if they were about to encounter the man in the Cubs hat, and if they did, whether they were prepared for what they might find beneath those mirrored sunglasses. The investigation was about to take a turn toward the truly impossible. The patrol car's headlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness as Agent Thorne and Detective Kozlowski approached the pool facility. From a quarter-mile away, they could see the problem. Someone had indeed managed to breach the crime scene perimeter, and the entire pool complex was now illuminated by an eerie, pulsating blue-green light that seemed to emanate from beneath the drained concrete basin. Jesus Christ, Kozlowski muttered, reaching for his radio. Dispatch, we're going to need more units at the pool. And call the fire department, we might have some kind of electrical hazard. But as they pulled into the parking lot, Thorne realized that what they were seeing couldn't be explained by faulty wiring or emergency lighting. The glow was too organic, too alive, pulsing with a rhythm that reminded her uncomfortably of a heart. Officer Tommy Valdez met them at the main gate, his usually steady hands trembling as he fumbled with the crime scene tape. Agent Thorne, thank God you're here. We have got a situation that's, well, it's not in any manual I have ever read. What happened to the perimeter? Kozlowski demanded. That's just it. Nobody broke in. At least, not the way you had expect. I was doing my hourly check around 3:10 when I heard this sound coming from the pool area, like water rushing through pipes, but there's no water in the system. When I went to investigate, Valdez gestured toward the main pool, and Thorne felt her breath catch in her throat. The concrete basin that had been bone dry when she had left an hour earlier was now filled with approximately 3 feet of water that glowed with that same unsettling blue-green phosphorescence. Where did the water come from? She asked. That's what we're trying to figure out. City Water Department says all the mains are shut off to this facility. There's no way water could be getting in through the normal systems. Thorne approached the pool's edge, her flashlight beam adding a harsh white overlay to the otherworldly glow. The water was completely still, like a sheet of luminescent glass, but as she watched, she could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Not fish or debris, but something larger, more purposeful. Detective, I need you to call FBI headquarters and request an immediate consultation with Dr. Elizabeth Hartman. Tell them we have a Code Silver situation. Kozlowski frowned. Code Silver? Unexplained phenomena that may pose a threat to public safety. It's not officially recognized, but Dr. Hartman will know what I mean. As Kozlowski moved away to make the call, Thorne knelt beside the pool's edge and reached toward the glowing water. The moment her fingertips broke the surface, she gasped and jerked her hand back. The water was ice cold, far colder than anything that should exist in the middle of an Indiana summer, and had a texture unlike anything she had ever experienced. Not quite liquid, not quite solid, but something in between, and it had definitely reacted to her touch. The moment her fingers had entered the water, the glow had intensified dramatically, and she could have sworn she heard something like whispered voices rising from the depths. When she pulled her hand away, the water retained the perfect impression of her fingertips on its surface, as if it were made of some kind of memory foam. Agent Thorne, Officer Valdez called from near the equipment shed. You need to see this. She walked over to find him standing outside the shed's open door, his flashlight beam focused on something inside. The 5 piles of children's clothing were still arranged in their perfect pentagon, but now they were glowing with the same blue-green light as the pool water. They started doing that about 5 minutes ago, Valdez explained. Right around the time the pool filled up. Thorne stepped inside the shed and immediately felt the temperature drop by at least 20 degrees. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and she could hear a sound like distant ocean waves, though they were hundreds of miles from the nearest large body of water. The drain in the center of the Pentagon was no longer covered by its metal grate. Instead, it gaped open like a mouth, and from its depths came both the sound of rushing water and that familiar sweet floral scent that was becoming associated with this impossible case. Has anyone looked down the drain? She asked. We were waiting for you. But Agent Thorne. Valdez's voice dropped to a whisper. I swear I can hear children's voices coming from down there. She knelt beside the opening and listened. At first there was only the sound of moving water and a low, resonant humming that seemed to come from deep underground. But gradually, as her ears adjusted, she began to pick out individual sounds that made her blood run cold. Laughter, children's laughter, echoing up from somewhere far below, and singing. The same wordless, musical vocalizations that witnesses had described hearing from the 5 missing children just before they vanished. Her radio crackled. "Agent Thorne, this is Dr. Hartman. I'm en route from Indianapolis with a specialized team. Do not, under any circumstances, allow anyone to enter that water until we arrive." "Dr. Hartman, what exactly are we dealing with here?" "I can't discuss it over an open channel. But Rebecca, you need to understand, if this is what I think it is, those children may still be alive, but not in any way that we can easily comprehend." The transmission ended, leaving Thorne staring into the glowing depths of the drain. Children's voices, she told herself. That's what she had heard, which meant that somewhere in the network of tunnels beneath Millbrook, 5 missing children were very much alive. She stood up and walked back toward the main pool, where the water continued to pulse with that hypnotic blue-green light. As she watched, something broke the surface near the center of the basin. A head, unmistakably human but visible for only a fraction of a second before disappearing back into the depths. "Did you see that?" she called to Valdez. "See what?" But even as she opened her mouth to describe what she had witnessed, Thorne realized that she couldn't be sure what she had seen. The figure had been there, and gone so quickly that it might have been a trick of the light, a reflection or wishful thinking on the part of an investigator, desperate for any sign of the missing children. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The children are safe for now, but dawn brings the tide change. After sunrise, they join the water forever. Come alone to Black Horse Quarry if you want to see them again." Thorne felt her heart hammering as she showed the message to Kozlowski, who had returned from making his calls. "Black Horse Quarry," he said grimly. "Luna mentioned that. It's about 3 miles east of here, been abandoned since the 1970s, supposed to be over 200 feet deep in some places. We need a tactical team." "No." The voice came from behind them, and they turned to see a figure approaching through the pre-dawn gloom. It was Luna Marsh, the girl from the hospital, though how she had managed to get here was a mystery in itself. "Luna, you shouldn't be here," Thorne said, moving toward the child. "How did you get out of the hospital?" "The waterman brought me. He wants me to tell you something important." Luna's voice had an odd, distant quality, as if she was speaking from very far away. The children went willingly. They heard the water singing and followed it home. But if too many people come to the quarry, he will take them all the way down where nobody can ever find them. "Luna, who is the waterman? What does he want?" The girl's eyes reflected the blue-green glow from the pool, making her look ethereal and otherworldly. "He's been sleeping under the water for a very long time, but every summer when it gets hot enough, he wakes up hungry for children who can hear the water's voice." Detective Kozlowski stepped forward. "Luna, where exactly are the missing children right now?" "Between the surface and the deep, in the place where the water remembers everything that ever drowned." She pointed toward the glowing pool. "He showed me how to find them, but I have to go back soon, or I will forget the way." Before either adult could react, Luna walked calmly to the edge of the pool and stepped into the glowing water. But instead of sinking, she stood on the surface as if it were solid ground, the luminescent liquid rising only to her ankles. "Luna, get out of there," Thorne shouted, but the girl was already walking toward the center of the pool, her small feet leaving ripples of intensified light with each step. When she reached the middle, Luna knelt down and placed her hands on the water's surface. Immediately, the entire pool erupted in brilliant blue-green light, so intense that both adults had to shield their eyes. When the glow faded to its previous level, Luna was gone. But in the exact spot where she had been standing, 5 small figures were now visible beneath the water's surface. They appeared to be sleeping, floating in perfect formation, their faces peaceful and their bodies surrounded by streams of silvery bubbles. "My God," Kozlowski whispered. "It's them. It's the missing children." Thorne was already reaching for her radio when the water began to drain, not through any visible outlet, but simply disappearing, as if being absorbed into the air itself. Within seconds, the pool was once again empty, leaving only damp concrete and the lingering scent of deep water. "Agent Thorne," came Dr. Hartman's voice over the radio. "We're pulling into the parking lot now. What's your status?" "We just saw the missing children. They're in some kind of suspended state underwater, and we have a location, Black Horse Quarry." "Copy that. Do not move toward the quarry until we have briefed you on what we're dealing with. This is bigger than a simple abduction case." As the FBI's specialized unit vehicles pulled into the parking lot, their headlights creating a harsh contrast to the otherworldly events of the past hour, Thorne found herself staring at the empty pool and wondering if she had just witnessed something that would redefine her understanding of reality. Dr. Elizabeth Hartman emerged from the lead vehicle wearing a hazmat suit and carrying equipment that looked more suited to a paranormal investigation than a criminal case. She was followed by a team of 6 specialists, whose credentials Thorne suspected extended far beyond traditional law. "Rebecca," Dr. Hartman said, her voice muffled by the hazmat helmet, "I need you to tell me everything that's happened since we spoke, and I need you to be very specific about any contact with the water." As Thorne recounted the events of the past hour, she watched Dr. Hartman's team set up equipment around the pool area. They were using devices she had never seen before: electromagnetic field detectors, temperature sensors that seemed to measure things beyond simple heat and cold, and what appeared to be underwater cameras designed for extreme depths. "Dr. Hartman," she said when she had finished her report, "what exactly are we dealing with here?" "The official term is an aquatic temporal anomaly," Dr. Hartman replied. "Unofficially, we call them water ghosts. They're entities that exist in a liminal space between our reality and something else. They're drawn to children because young minds are more receptive to their influence." "Are the children still alive?" "That's complicated. They exist in a state that's neither fully alive nor dead. The entity preserves them, but not in any way that our medical science can define as life. They become part of its consciousness, its memory." Kozlowski stepped forward. "So how do we get them back?" "That's why we're here. There's a brief window during what the entity perceives as tide changes, when the children can be recovered. But it requires someone to voluntarily enter the entity's domain and guide them back." Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold emanating from the pool area. Someone has to go into the water with this thing. Not just anyone. Someone who's had direct contact with the entity's influence, but hasn't been fully claimed by it. Someone like— Dr. Hartman paused, studying her readings. "Someone like you, Rebecca. The water responded to your touch earlier. That means you have the potential to survive the crossing." As dawn began to break over Millbrook, painting the eastern sky in shades of pale gold and pink, Thorne realized that she was being asked to do something that went against every instinct she had developed in 14 years of law enforcement. She was being asked to trust in the impossible, to willingly enter a supernatural realm, and to risk her own life for 5 children she had never met. But as she thought about the families spending their second sleepless night, about Luna Marsh's haunting description of children trapped between the surface and the deep, she knew there was really no choice at all. "What do I need to do?" she asked. Dr. Hartman consulted her instruments one more time. "We need to get to Black Horse Quarry before full sunrise. That's when the entity will either release the children or claim them permanently. And Rebecca," she looked up from her equipment with an expression of deep concern, "there's something else you need to know. This isn't the first time we have attempted a recovery operation. The previous attempts didn't end well." As the FBI team packed their equipment and prepared to move toward the quarry, Thorne found herself looking back at the empty pool one more time. Somewhere in the network of impossible tunnels beneath this ordinary Indiana town, 5 children were depending on her willingness to believe in things that couldn't exist. And somewhere else, in the depths of an abandoned quarry, an ancient entity was preparing for a confrontation that would determine whether those children ever saw their families again. The sun was rising and time was running out. Black Horse Quarry, July 17th, The abandoned quarry stretched before them like a wound in the earth, its dark waters reflecting the pre-dawn sky with an oily sheen that made Agent Thorne's skin crawl. What had once been a limestone mining operation now resembled something from another world entirely, a perfectly circular basin nearly 300 feet across, surrounded by vertical rock walls that plunged into depths that local surveys had never successfully measured. Dr. Hartman's specialized team worked with military precision, setting up their equipment around the quarry's rim while maintaining a careful distance from the water's edge. The electromagnetic readings were off the charts, fluctuating wildly, as if something massive was moving far beneath the surface. "The entity's agitated," Dr. Hartman announced, studying her instruments. "It knows we're here." Thorne stood at the quarry's edge, wearing the specialized diving suit that Dr. Hartman's team had provided. The suit was unlike anything she had seen in her FBI training, constructed from some kind of metallic mesh that hummed with electrical current, designed to protect the wearer from what Dr. Hartman had described as psychic pressure during underwater encounters with temporal anomalies. "Rebecca," Dr. Hartman said, approaching with a device that looked like a combination of a sonar unit and a Geiger counter. "I need you to understand something before you go down there. What you're about to encounter isn't just a predator. It's something that exists partially outside our normal space-time continuum. The children you saw aren't technically in our reality anymore." "What does that mean for getting them back?" "It means that down there the normal laws of physics don't apply. Time moves differently, space can fold in on itself, and your perceptions will be influenced by the entity's consciousness. You will need to maintain focus on your objective and trust the suit's guidance systems." Detective Kozlowski emerged from one of the FBI vehicles, his face grim. "I just got word from the hospital. 3 more children have gone missing from their homes overnight. All of them lived within a mile of the pool." Thorne felt her stomach drop. "The entity is expanding its influence." "That's what we were afraid of," Dr. Hartman said. "These things don't just take children randomly. They're building something, a collection of young minds that will eventually allow them to fully manifest in our reality." The water in the quarry began to glow with the same blue-green phosphorescence they had witnessed at the pool, but far more intense. The light pulsed upward from the depths like a massive heartbeat, and with each pulse, Thorne could hear something that made her blood run cold. The sound of children singing in perfect harmony. "That's our signal," Dr. Hartman said. "The entity is calling. Are you ready?" Thorne checked the suit's systems one final time. The heads-up display showed normal atmospheric readings, though she suspected that normal was about to become a relative concept. The communications array would allow her to maintain contact with the surface team, at least until she descended beyond the equipment's operational limits. "What happens if I can't find them?" she asked. "Then we implement Protocol 7, Dr. Hartman replied, though her expression suggested this wasn't a desirable outcome. "Which is, we seal the quarry with concrete and hope the entity goes dormant for another few decades." Thorne realized that she wasn't just risking her own life, she was the children's only chance of survival. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like lead. She activated the suit's descent controls and stepped backward off the quarry's edge. The water was shockingly cold, even through the suit's environmental protection. But more disturbing was the texture. It felt thick, almost viscous, as if she were descending through liquid mercury rather than water. The blue-green glow intensified as she sank, revealing that the quarry walls were covered with some kind of organic growth that pulsed and shifted as she passed. At 50 feet depth, her communications crackled. "Rebecca, how are you doing down there? Water's strange, but the suit is functioning. I can see some kind of bioluminescent algae or coral covering the walls." "That's not algae," Dr. Hartman's voice was tight with concern. "That's part of the entity itself. You're entering its physical manifestation." At 100 feet, Thorne's sonar detected something massive moving below her. The readings suggested a structure roughly the size of a city block, but the shape kept shifting, making it impossible to get a clear image. At 150 feet, she entered what could only be described as another world. The water around her became crystal clear, no longer the murky brown of a limestone quarry but the pristine blue of a tropical lagoon. She could see perfectly in all directions, despite the fact that no natural light could penetrate to this depth, and what she saw defied every law of physics she had ever learned. She was swimming through what appeared to be an underwater city. Buildings stretched in all directions, their architecture unlike anything from human civilization. The structures seemed to grow organically from the quarry floor, twisting upward in impossible spirals and geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. And between the buildings, swimming with graceful, inhuman movements, were figures that her mind initially refused to process. They appeared to be children at first glance, but as they drew closer, she could see that they were something else entirely. Their skin had a translucent aquatic quality, and instead of hair, they had flowing tendrils that moved independently in the water. Their eyes were completely black, reflecting the blue-green light like mirrors. "Dr. Hartman," she whispered into her communications unit. I'm not sure how to describe this." "What do you see, Rebecca?" "An underwater city, and children, but not human children anymore. Those are the previous victims." Dr. Hartman's voice was heavy with sorrow. "The entity transforms them over time, makes them part of its collective consciousness. But the newest additions, the 5 from yesterday, they should still be recoverable." As if responding to Dr. Hartman's words, the transformed children began swimming toward Thorne in a coordinated pattern. They moved without hostility, but with a kind of eerie curiosity, circling her at a respectful distance while making soft musical sounds that she could hear even through the water. One of them approached closer than the others, a boy who appeared to be around 10 years old, though his features had that same translucent, aquatic quality as the rest. When he opened his mouth to speak, his voice came through the water as clearly as if they were standing in air. "The new ones are waiting for you," he said. "But the Deep Father wants to speak with you first." "Who is the Deep Father?" The boy pointed toward the center of the underwater city, where the largest structure rose from the quarry floor like a twisted cathedral. "He has been sleeping for many years, but your touch at the pool awakened him fully. He wants to understand why you can hear the water's voice without being called." Thorne followed the boy through the maze of organic buildings, surrounded by the silent escort of transformed children. As they swam deeper into the city, she began to understand the true scope of what she was seeing. This wasn't just a lair or a hiding place. It was a civilization, built over decades or perhaps centuries by an intelligence that existed partially outside normal reality. The cathedral structure loomed ahead, its walls covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. As they approached the entrance, a massive archway that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, the water around them began to vibrate with a deep resonant sound that she felt in her bones. Inside the cathedral, the water became even clearer, filled with a golden light that emanated from a figure seated on what could only be described as a throne made of crystallized water. The Deep Father was humanoid in basic shape, but clearly not human. Its skin was the color of deep ocean water, and its features shifted constantly between human and something far more ancient. When it spoke, its voice filled the entire space with harmonic overtones that made Thorne's mind reel. "Agent Rebecca Thorne," it said, and she realized with shock that it knew her name. "You have come seeking the young ones who answered our call." "I have come to take them home," she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Home," the entity repeated, and there was something like amusement in its tone. "What is home to a creature of water and earth? These children have found their true home here, in the deep places where water remembers all things. They have families who love them, parents who are desperate to see them again." "Love," the Deep Father said, and this time there was definitely amusement. "You speak of the temporary attachments of surface dwellers. We offer something far greater: eternal connection, perfect understanding, existence beyond the limitations of flesh and time. As it spoke, images began flowing through the water around them. Memories, Thorne realized, drawn from the minds of the transformed children. She saw flashes of their human lives, birthday parties, bedtime stories, scraped knees being kissed better by loving parents. But she also saw their transformation, the gradual awakening to what the entity called water consciousness, the expansion of their perceptions beyond human limitations. You could join them, the Deep Father offered. Your mind is already partially open to our influence. You could become a bridge between our realm and the surface world, helping us gather more children who are ready for transformation. Never, Thorne said firmly. Then you condemn them to a half-existence, the entity replied. For we cannot release them completely. They have already begun the change. To return them to the surface world now would be incomplete. What do you mean? The Deep Father gestured, and the water around them filled with new images. Children who had been rescued from similar entities in the past. Thorne watched in horror as she saw the aftermath. Kids who had returned to their families physically intact, but fundamentally changed, unable to adapt to life on land, slowly wasting away as they pined for the depths that had claimed their souls. You begin to understand, the entity said. The choice is not between captivity and freedom. It is between complete transformation and slow death. There has to be another way. Perhaps, the Deep Father said thoughtfully. But it would require a sacrifice. Someone would need to take their place willingly, to serve as an anchor between our realm and yours. Someone whose consciousness could bridge both worlds. Thorne felt her heart pounding as she realized what the entity was suggesting. You want me to stay in their place? Not exactly. We propose a different arrangement. You remain here as our ambassador, maintaining the connection between the transformed children and the surface world. They return to their families, but with the ability to visit our realm whenever they choose, a voluntary relationship rather than captivity. And if I refuse, then we keep all 8 children, the original 5 plus the 3 who came to us last night, and we continue to expand our influence until we have gathered enough young minds to fully manifest in your reality. The implications hit Thorne like a physical blow. The entity wasn't just collecting children randomly, it was building toward something massive, a permanent invasion of the surface world that would put every child on Earth at risk. I need to see them, she said. The 5 from the pool. I need to know they're truly safe before I agree to anything. The Deep Father nodded and gestured toward one of the cathedral's side chambers. They await you there, but be warned, they have already begun to change. The question is whether you can accept what they are becoming. Thorne swam toward the indicated chamber, her mind racing with the impossible choice she was being forced to make. As she entered the smaller space, she found herself face to face with the 5 missing children. They were floating in a circle, their eyes closed as if in deep sleep. But she could see that the transformation had indeed begun. Their skin had taken on a slight translucent quality, and their hair moved with the same independent motion she had observed in the fully transformed children. But their faces were still recognizably human, still recognizably the kids whose photos had been circulated in the Amber Alert. Tanner Hartwell, the boy with the shark swim trunks, opened his eyes as she approached. When he spoke, his voice carried the same harmonic quality as the other transformed children, but she could still hear the 8-year-old boy underneath. Agent Thorne, he said, are you here to take us home? I'm going to try, Tanner, but I need you to tell me something. Are you happy here? Do you want to stay, or do you want to go back to your family? The boy's expression became complex, as if he were trying to reconcile conflicting emotions. It's beautiful here, he said slowly. I can breathe underwater, and I can hear the water singing all the time. But I miss my mom and dad. I miss my room and my dog, and he began to cry, and the tears that fell were luminescent, mixing with the surrounding water in streams of blue-green light. We all miss home, said Delilah Patterson, The girl with the yellow hair ties. But the Deep Father says we can't go back the way we were. He says we're different now. What if there was a way for you to go home and still visit here whenever you wanted? Thorne asked. What if you could have both worlds? The children looked at each other with expressions of desperate hope. It was clear that despite the entity's influence, they were still fundamentally human. Still children who wanted to be with their families. The Deep Father mentioned a possibility. Thorne continued. But it would mean that someone else would need to stay here as a connection between your world and ours. You, said Paige Hendricks, the 6-year-old who had been described as the group's leader. You would stay so we could go home. Thorne nodded. Would you want that? Would you be willing to let me make that trade? The children conferred in whispers that sounded like flowing water, their transformed nature allowing them to communicate in ways that went beyond spoken language. Finally, Tanner spoke for the group. We want to go home, he said simply, but we don't want you to be trapped here forever. I wouldn't be trapped, Thorne explained, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. I would be a bridge. I could visit the surface world too, just like you could visit here. It was a gamble based on trust in an entity that she didn't fully understand, a creature that had already demonstrated a willingness to abduct children and transform them against their will. But as she looked at the 5 young faces surrounding her, all of them desperate to return to their families while still being fundamentally changed by their experience, she knew there was no other choice. She swam back to the main chamber where the Deep Father waited. I accept your proposal, she said. I will serve as your ambassador if you allow the children to return to their families with the ability to choose when they visit your realm. The entity regarded her for a long moment, its features shifting through expressions that were almost human. You would sacrifice your life as a surface dweller for children you barely know. It's not a sacrifice if it means they get to grow up with their families. Very well, the Deep Father said. But understand that this bond, once formed, cannot be easily broken. You will become partially transformed yourself, able to exist in both realms but never fully belonging to either. As the entity spoke, Thorne felt a change beginning in her body. The specialized diving suit seemed to dissolve around her, replaced by something that felt more organic, more integrated with her nervous system. She could suddenly breathe the water as easily as air, and her vision became enhanced, allowing her to see the intricate details of the underwater city with perfect clarity. The children may go, the Deep Father announced, but they will carry a part of our realm with them always. And you, Rebecca Thorne, will carry a part of their surface world into our depths. Thorne felt herself rising through the water, the 5 children swimming alongside her, all of them moving toward the surface with supernatural speed. As they ascended, she could see the first rays of true sunrise beginning to penetrate the quarry's depths, painting the water in shades of gold and amber. But she could also feel the Deep Father's consciousness settling into a corner of her mind, a constant presence that would link her forever to the underwater realm. She was no longer entirely human, but she was still herself, still Agent Rebecca Thorne, still determined to protect children from harm. As they broke the surface of Black Horse Quarry, she heard Dr. Hartman's voice over the communications system, filled with relief and amazement. Rebecca, you have got them. All 5 children are accounted for. But as she helped the children onto the rocky shore, Thorne knew that this wasn't the end of the case. It was just the beginning of something far more complex, a new kind of existence that would require her to navigate between 2 worlds, serving as a guardian for children who would forever be caught between human and something else entirely. The sun was fully up now, painting the quarry and surrounding forest in brilliant morning light. But beneath the surface, in the depths that only she could now truly access, an ancient intelligence waited patiently for the next phase of its plan to unfold. And somewhere in the back of her transformed consciousness, Thorne realized that her agreement with the Deep Father might have saved 5 children, but it had also opened a door between worlds that could never be fully closed again. FBI Deep Watch Command Center, Quantico. Director Sarah Morrison, daughter of the late Frank Morrison, who had initiated Project Deepwatch, stood before a wall of monitors displaying real-time data from aquatic facilities across the globe. 19 years of preparation had led to this moment, and every screen told the same terrifying story. The hunger had arrived. "Ma'am," called Agent Kevin Park from his station, "we're getting reports from 14 countries now. Children are disappearing from pools, lakes, even bathtubs. The pattern is accelerating." Morrison's jaw tightened as she studied the data. In the past 72 hours, over 3,000 children worldwide had vanished in circumstances identical to the Millbrook incident. But this time, there was no rescue mission possible. This time, the children were being taken not by Earth's aquatic entities, but by something far more malevolent. "Where's Agent Thorne?" Morrison demanded. "Still at Black Horse Quarry, ma'am. She's been maintaining the link for 6 hours straight. Medical is concerned about the strain on her system." Morrison nodded grimly. Rebecca Thorne, now 45 years old, but possessing an otherworldly vitality that made her appear unchanged from her transformation 19 years earlier, was their only direct connection to the underwater realm that had become humanity's unlikely ally. The Millbrook Five, as they'd come to be known in classified files, was scattered across the country, in positions of influence they'd achieved through careers guided by supernatural insight. Dr. Tanner Hartwell worked at the CDC, monitoring global health patterns. Delilah Patterson Chen ran a network of children's hospitals. The Castellanos twins had become leaders in environmental engineering and quantum physics, respectively. And Dr. Paige Hendricks served as the director of a private foundation that had, over 19 years, quietly identified and recruited hundreds of children who could hear the water's song. All of them maintained the facade of normal human adults, while developing abilities that had taken them far beyond the limitations of ordinary consciousness. And all of them were now converging on strategic locations around the globe for humanity's final gambit. Morrison's secure phone rang. The caller ID showed only a number she'd been waiting 19 years to see. "Director Morrison," came Agent Thorne's voice, but it was layered with harmonic overtones that suggested she was speaking from multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. "It's time. The Deep Father is calling in all debts." "What's the situation?" "The hunger isn't just taking children, it's harvesting consciousness from anyone with psychic potential. But there's something else, something we didn't anticipate. The entity isn't acting alone." Morrison felt ice form in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "There are humans helping it. Government officials, military leaders, corporate executives, people who've been promised power in exchange for facilitating the harvest. The hunger has been influencing Earth longer than we realized." The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow. For 19 years, Project Deepwatch had operated under the assumption that they were preparing for an external threat. The possibility that the invasion had already begun from within had been their greatest fear. How extensive is the infiltration? We're still assessing, but it goes all the way to the top. The President's Chief of Staff, 3 Supreme Court justices, the heads of major tech companies, they've all been compromised. That's why the missing children reports are being suppressed. The media blackout isn't incompetence, it's deliberate. Morrison began issuing rapid orders to her team. Initiate Protocol Omega. All Deepwatch operatives to active status. And get me a secure line to the Millbrook Five. Within minutes, her screens were displaying feeds from around the world as the true scope of the crisis became apparent. In Australia, an entire water park had been evacuated after security footage showed children walking into the pools and simply disappearing beneath the surface. In Japan, a school swimming competition had ended with 47 young athletes vanishing simultaneously. In Brazil, an entire favela built around a flooded quarry had gone silent overnight. But most disturbing were the reports coming from major population centers. In New York, Los Angeles, London, and Tokyo, government officials were actively preventing emergency responses to the disappearances claiming technical difficulties with communication systems while promising that alternative solutions were being implemented. Director, Agent Park called out, his voice tight with fear. "We're receiving a transmission from Agent Thorne at the quarry. But ma'am, it's not just her voice anymore." The communication system crackled to life, filled with the sound of rushing water and harmonic voices that seemed to speak in mathematical equations rather than words. Sarah Morrison came a voice that was recognizably Thorne's, but carried the weight of cosmic intelligence. "This is Agent Thorne speaking for the Deep Father and the collective consciousness of Earth's aquatic realm. We have grave news." "What is it, Rebecca?" "The hunger has made humanity an offer. Complete surrender in exchange for the preservation of 10% of the global population. World leaders have 48 hours to accept, or the harvest accelerates to include all human consciousness, regardless of age." Morrison felt the command center fall silent around her. Every technician, every analyst, every agent was staring at the speakers as the implications sank in. "Rebecca, what are our chances if we fight?" "Without help, less than 3%. The hunger has been draining psychic energy from the disappeared children to power dimensional rifts across the planet. In 6 hours, those rifts will be large enough to allow physical manifestation of the entity's true form. And with help." There was a pause filled with the sound of underwater voices conferring in languages that predated human civilization. "The Deep Father's people have been preparing for this war for millennia. They possess weapons that can wound something like the hunger. But deployment requires a massive sacrifice of psychic energy, the kind of energy that can only be generated by willing human consciousness." Morrison understood immediately. "You're talking about the Millbrook 5 and everyone they've recruited over the years. Not just them. We need every human who's ever made contact with the aquatic realm. Every child who was taken and returned. Every adult who's heard the water's song. Everyone who's been touched by the Deep Father's influence. They must all return to the water willingly and add their consciousness to the weapon." "How many people are we talking about?" "Globally, approximately 50,000 individuals." But Sarah, Thorne's voice became more recognizably human for a moment. "Once they join the collective, they won't be coming back. This isn't a temporary merging, it's permanent transformation." Morrison stared at the wall of monitors showing children disappearing into impossibly glowing water around the world. 50,000 people, including Rebecca Thorne and the 5 children she'd spent 19 years protecting, would have to sacrifice their humanity to save the human race. "Do they know?" she asked quietly. "They've always known. From the moment they were first changed, they understood this was the price they might have to pay. The question is whether you're prepared to authorize a plan that will be seen as the greatest conspiracy in human history." Morrison thought about the reports that would follow if humanity survived. The revelation that government agencies had been secretly recruiting and transforming citizens for nearly 2 decades. The discovery that aquatic entities had been living beneath Earth's waters for thousands of years. The truth that humanity's survival had depended on allies most people would consider monsters. "Rebecca, what happens to the 50,000 people who've been compromised by the hunger's influence? Once the entity is destroyed, they'll revert to normal human consciousness, but they'll remember everything. They'll know what they were willing to do in exchange for power." The command center's main screen suddenly displayed a new image, a live feed from the White House Situation Room, where she could see the president and his advisors in heated discussion. But what made her blood run cold was the fact that 3 of the advisors had the telltale blue-green glow around their eyes that indicated supernatural influence. "Ma'am," Agent Park said urgently, "I'm seeing similar readings from government facilities worldwide. The hunger's influence is more extensive than we imagined." Morrison made the decision that would define the rest of human history. "Agent Thorne, you have authorization for the Deep Father Protocol. Tell the Millbrook 5 that their country is proud of their service. And tell them—" She paused, thinking of 5 children who had spent 19 years growing up, knowing they might have to sacrifice everything for a world that would never understand their sacrifice. Tell them that their families will know the truth. Understood, Director. Initiating final phase. Around the world, 50,000 individuals who had lived ordinary lives while carrying extraordinary secrets began making their way to bodies of water. In Millbrook, Dr. Tanner Hartwell left his laboratory and walked to the municipal pool where his transformation had begun. In Seattle, Delilah Patterson Chun stepped into the Puget Sound. In Los Angeles and Miami, the Castellanos twins entered the Pacific and Atlantic simultaneously. And in Colorado, Dr. Paige Hendricks stood at the edge of a mountain lake that connected to underground water systems spanning the continent. All of them carried with them the enhanced consciousness they'd developed over 19 years, but also the memories of their human lives, birthdays and graduations, first loves and career achievements, the ordinary joys that made sacrifice meaningful. At exactly midnight Eastern Time, they entered the water together, their consciousness joining in a collective that spanned continents and transcended the boundaries between human and inhuman intelligence. Morrison watched the transformation through satellite feeds as bodies of water across the globe began glowing with the same blue-green phosphorescence that had marked the beginning of this story 19 years earlier. But this time, the light was not mysterious or threatening. It was purposeful, coordinated, and filled with the focused intent of 50,000 minds working in perfect harmony. The battle itself lasted only 17 minutes. When the light faded, the hunger was gone. The dimensional rifts closed. The 3,000 disappeared children reappeared in the exact locations they'd vanished from, unharmed but carrying memories of cosmic horror that would take years of therapy to process. But the 50,000 volunteers who had joined the Deep Fathers Collective to power humanity's salvation were gone forever, transformed into something that existed partially in Earth's oceans and partially in realms beyond human understanding. In the aftermath, as government officials worldwide struggled to explain the night when every body of water on Earth had glowed with supernatural light, Director Morrison faced the task of revealing the truth to a world that had barely avoided extinction. The official report, declassified 6 months later, told the story of a 19-year government operation to prepare for an extraterrestrial threat. It described the recruitment and training of psychically gifted individuals, the alliance with non-human intelligences, and the ultimate sacrifice made by 50,000 volunteers to save human civilization. What it didn't include was the personal cost. 5 children who had grown up knowing they would never have truly normal lives, an FBI agent who had surrendered her humanity to serve as a bridge between worlds, and thousands of families who would spend the rest of their lives knowing their loved ones had become something wonderful and terrible and utterly beyond human comprehension. But in the depths of Earth's waters, in the spaces between what humans called real and unreal, Rebecca Thorne and the Millbrook Five continued to exist, not as the people they had been, but as guardians of a world that would always need protecting from threats that lived in the darkness between stars. And sometimes, on quiet summer days when the water in municipal pools caught the light just right, children would pause in their play and listen to something that sounded almost like singing, carried on currents that connected every drop of water on Earth to the vast intelligence that had sacrificed everything to keep them safe. The case file for the Millbrook Five was officially closed on December 31, 2024. But in the margins of the final report, Director Morrison had written a single line that would define how she remembered the strangest and most important investigation in FBI history. They saved us all by becoming something we could never understand. The pool was quiet now. The children were safe. And in the depths where human eyes could never see, ancient guardians waited patiently for the next threat that would inevitably emerge from the spaces between worlds, ready to sacrifice themselves again if necessary to protect the small, fragile miracle of human consciousness in a universe filled with hunger and darkness. The end.